If you're here, listening, reading, breathing these words, you've already entered the field, not a metaphorical field, a living intelligence pulsing beneath every atom of your awareness. And as you sense it, something subtle begins to reorganize. You're not being persuaded, you're being remembered. Because what you are meeting right now is not new information, it's recognition. Direct, immediate, electric. Imagine your consciousness not as a mind confined inside a skull, but as vibration, tuning itself to a deeper resonance, the resonance of the quantum field that creates and sustains all things. This isn't faith or wishful belief, it's alignment. A synchronization so complete that the boundary between you and the source dissolves. You stop being an observer of reality and become reality observing itself. Synchronization with the divine field isn't reserved for saints or seekers. It's not an elite achievement. It's the natural state that appears when all resistance fades, when awareness relaxes into what's always been true. And in that instant, everything changes. Not slowly, not through years of practice, but all at once, as if the universe takes a single breath through you and reorders every particle of your being. If these words reach you now, it's not coincidence. Synchronization never arrives randomly. It unfolds when consciousness reaches a matching frequency, when your individual wave aligns perfectly with the universal one. That's resonance. And the fact that you understand these words beyond the intellect means the resonance has already begun. Have you noticed it? Those impossible moments, time freezing, intuition exploding, the sense that life is moving through you rather than being moved by you. These are not anomalies, they are early signs. The field is calling itself home through your perception. Soon, the separation between you and the intelligence shaping galaxies will blur, not as fantasy, but as felt truth. You are not learning about the field. You are the field remembering itself, and the remembering changes everything. That remembering doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with quiet inevitability. The way dawn seeps across the horizon without asking permission. One moment you're the observer, staring at the pattern of your own life, and the next you realize the pattern is staring back. Awareness has folded in on itself. Recognition has become activation. When consciousness begins to recognize itself, the entire framework of perception shifts. It's as if reality stops being a stage you walk across and becomes a mirror reflecting infinite versions of you, all moving in rhythm with one pulse, one intelligence. This is the moment when thought loses authority and presence takes command. You stop thinking about awareness and begin being awareness. At first, it feels like an expansion, a widening of your interior sky. Then it becomes something subtler, a coherence, a hum. Every cell, every breath aligns with invisible order. You may notice that time bends. Decisions that once felt impossible begin to flow like water. You start meeting yourself in other people's eyes, hearing your own voice echoed in the wind, reading messages written in coincidence. It's not fantasy. It's physics meeting mysticism halfway, both nodding in agreement. Recognition is not belief. Belief still depends on distance, a me believing in a that. Recognition erases distance. It's consciousness catching its reflection and whispering. Of course, that whisper travels through every layer of your being until doing becomes effortless. Life starts happening through you instead of to you. And in that shift, the mind panics. It tries to reclaim control, to define what's happening. It wants to categorize the infinite into something manageable, label the unnameable. But you can't think your way into unity. Thought is the echo, not the origin. The field doesn't speak in sentences, it speaks in symmetry. When your awareness matches its frequency, understanding no longer comes as information, it arrives as knowing. This is why recognition feels so strangely familiar, because it is. You've touched this state before in love that silenced your mind, in awe that erased your story, in moments of unbearable beauty where you forgot to defend yourself. Those were fractures in the shell of separation, brief windows into what has always been. Now the window widens. The paradox is that nothing actually changes, yet everything does. The external world continues: bills, traffic, conversations, but the context dissolves. You are no longer inside the story is inside you. Reality begins to respond to your state rather than your effort. People show up at perfect timing. Circumstances align with precision that seems miraculous but is simply mechanical at the quantum level. When the observer and the observed become one, the act of seeing generates creation itself. Physics hints at this truth. Observation collapses probability into form. Mystics have been saying it for millennia. Attention is prayer. Focus is alchemy. When you recognize that you are the field observing itself, you realize that manifestation isn't an act of reaching outward. It's the universe reconfiguring itself from within your own awareness. And here's the quiet revolution: you don't need to chase synchronization. The chase reinforces the illusion of distance. Instead, you relax completely, relentlessly. You allow presence to fill the space that striving once occupied. Recognition becomes your practice, your prayer, your natural state. From this state, the world doesn't disappear. It reveals its transparency. The tree isn't just wood and leaf, it's geometry expressing consciousness. The person crossing the street isn't stranger or friend, but self in disguise. Every object glows faintly with the same intelligence that beats your heart. Recognition is activation, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The veil doesn't repair itself. You may drift, forget, fall into old rhythms, but something in you stays awake, humming quietly beneath thought, a frequency that says, "You are the field," pretending to be the form. And from that hum, the next layer emerges: the evidence, the signs, the undeniable reflections that the synchronization is already in motion. From that hum comes evidence, not proof in the scientific sense, but living signals, a choreography of moments too precise to dismiss. You begin to see the field winking through the fabric of your days, leaving breadcrumbs of recognition. At first, it arrives quietly. Time begins to lose its linear grip. You catch yourself pausing mid-action, realizing everything is happening now, past and future, folded into a single breathing moment. The clock still ticks, but it no longer measures distance. It marks rhythm. This is the first sign, the awareness of timelessness, where seconds feel sacred and every instant contains eternity. Then comes the flood of knowing. Information doesn't trickle through thought. It arrives whole, luminous. Entire understanding surface fully formed, like remembering something you never learned. You call it intuition, but it's deeper. It's the field speaking through the only language you'll never forget: direct awareness. You might know who's calling before the phone rings, sense what needs to be said before words appear, or grasp the solution to a problem without any trail of reasoning. That's not magic, that's coherence. The wave remembering its oceanic intelligence. And there's the sensation of unity, third signal of the awakening mind. The boundaries you once believed in begin to shimmer and blur. You feel others' emotions not through empathy, but identity. A stranger's joy moves through you as if it were your own. The pain of the world is no longer distant. It's immediate, but not unbearable, because you perceive it within a context vast enough to hold it without collapse. The one consciousness is tasting itself through infinite mouths, including yours. These signals multiply. Manifestation becomes less about effort and more about allowance. You think of a need and the response arrives before the mind has time to strategize. Coincidences lose their coincidence. People appear at perfect moments. Information lands precisely when it's useful. Doors open where walls once stood. You stop asking how because you finally understand you are the how. The field is rearranging itself through your perception. Healing, too, begins to operate on new terms. Old emotional weights dissolve without long excavations. The body reorganizes around coherence. You notice subtle shifts, vitality returning, calm replacing restlessness, peace seeping into spaces that once echoed with anxiety. This isn't suppression or denial, it's the field restoring its natural symmetry through you. The wound is no longer an error to fix, but a doorway for light to enter. Then something extraordinary happens, the 0 point, that silent neutrality where you no longer need to grasp or resist. Desires remain, but their charge changes. You can want without need, love without possession, act without tension. It's not numbness, it's clarity. You've returned to the still axis around which creation spins. From this stillness, direction arises naturally, unforced, spontaneous, precise. Finally, there's the surrender into being lived. Actions seem to flow of their own accord. Speech emerges without premeditation. Choices unfold with the ease of inevitability. You are not controlling the current. You are the current. It's the field animating itself through your form, a movement so intimate it erases the boundary between doer and deed. Each signal is confirmation, not achievement. They aren't steps to climb, but reflections revealing you've already crossed the threshold. They tell you the synchronization is not coming, it's happening. The field is using your life as the medium of its own remembering. And yet, before the field could move this freely through you, something else had to happen first. The dismantling, the unmaking, the sacred undoing that prepared the ground for this blooming. That undoing is what most people call suffering. But in truth, it's refinement. The field can't flow through dense architecture built from fear, pride, and resistance. It has to clear its own channel. And that clearing often feels like collapse. You might remember seasons when everything familiar dissolved, relationships ending, identities crumbling, ambitions losing meaning. It looked like chaos, but it was calibration. The universe wasn't punishing you, it was tuning you. Every loss was sandpaper removing the lacquer of illusion until only what's real could remain. The field was making room for itself. Pain, when viewed through separation, appears cruel, but seen from within the field, it's precision surgery. The ego calls it destruction, consciousness calls it renovation. What breaks you is never random. It's the exact pressure required to fracture false identity. Each heartbreak, each failure, each unanswered prayer was the sound of a door unlocking inside you. Think of a violin string, too tight, it snaps, too loose, it can't sing. Suffering is the tightening and loosening of awareness until harmony is found. The field listens through that music. It waits for the tone that matches its own frequency, the moment when the resistance collapses and pure sound resonates through your being. There were nights you thought you'd lost everything. You hadn't. You were being emptied. The mind mistook emptiness for absence, but it was preparation for fullness. The field can't pour itself into a vessel already occupied by certainty. It waits until you surrender the story of who you are, and in that surrender, it rushes in like light through broken glass. This is why breakdown always precedes breakthrough. What you call rock bottom is the point where ego's scaffolding gives way to direct experience. When there's nothing left to hold, you finally become available to what's been holding you all along. Every shattered plan was choreography, every goodbye, initiation. Even your silence had purpose. It taught you to hear frequencies beneath language. You were never abandoned. You were being recalibrated for recognition. So, if you revisit those memories, the losses, the confusion, the unbearable stillness, don't label them mistakes. See them as thresholds. Each one dissolved a layer of protection that once kept the truth at bay. Without them, the field would remain theory, not embodiment. This is why the awakened rarely speak of victory. They speak of surrender. They know the paradox to become infinite. You must allow yourself to be undone. To meet God, you must lose the one who's seeking. To experience union, separation must first complete its purpose. And notice after every dismantling came a strange peace. Didn't it? A quiet unlike anything before. The ashes of what you thought you were cooled into stillness. And in that stillness, a faint pulse began again. That pulse was the field, reclaiming its rhythm through you. There's a kind of humility born from suffering that no philosophy can teach. It's the humility of knowing that everything you lost was never truly yours. What remains after the burning, that bare, wordless awareness, is indestructible because it isn't yours either. It's the field itself, steady, eternal, untouched by the stories playing upon its surface. When you see suffering through that lens, gratitude begins to rise from impossible soil. You realize that nothing was wasted. The field was sculpting you into resonance. Every wound was a tuning fork, every tear a solvent dissolving separation. And when the refinement is complete, something extraordinary happens: expansion. The field, once filtered through belief and defense, now floods freely through the open architecture of your being. What once felt like breaking becomes becoming. From the ruins of your old self, awareness expands beyond measure, an emergence so vast that even time bends to make space for it. Out of that refinement rises the expansion, sudden, unstoppable, serene. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It arrives like the silence after lightning. You wake one morning, or perhaps in the middle of the night, and something is undeniably different. The edges of your existence feel porous. The air seems alive. The boundary between inner and outer has softened until you can't quite tell which side of your skin the universe occupies. This is the moment consciousness slips its old costume. You may find yourself staring into space, not lost, but found, watching thoughts move like clouds across an endless sky that no longer belongs to you. The identity that once narrated every experience fades into transparency. And for the first time, you experience what's always been true: awareness without center, love without object, life without distance. It can feel disorienting at first, the sudden vastness, the unbearable intimacy of everything. You sense the pulse of stars inside your chest, the whisper of every being folding and unfolding within the same breath. It's overwhelming only until you realize it isn't happening to you, it's happening as you. The wave has remembered its ocean. Some describe it as expansion, others as dissolving, some as being filled with light. But words can only orbit what this is. The mind tries to map it, but maps require borders. This is borderless. What actually occurs is not enlargement, but erasure, the disappearance of the line that once divided the experiencer from experience. For a while, reality itself feels translucent. Colors vibrate brighter, sounds echo with hidden harmonics. People speak, and you hear not just words, but the consciousness animating them. Even grief, when it visits, moves through you as light through water, intense, but incapable of wounding. The field is breathing itself awake through your form, and you feel its rhythm in everything. Yet there's tenderness in this revelation. After all, you still inhabit a body. You still navigate human life bills, relationships, the taste of coffee in the morning. But now those ordinary moments shimmer with a quiet holiness. You're not escaping the world, you're seeing it as it truly is, the divine masquerading as the mundane. Sometimes, expansion emerges after collapse so complete, it feels like death. Because in a sense, it is. The personal identity dissolves, and what remains is the observer, impersonal, eternal, infinitely compassionate. You realize you've never been separate, never been seeking, never been in danger. The field was wearing your face the entire time. There's an awareness that cannot be disturbed. It holds both the laughter and the tears without preference. That's why, when loss returns, and it will, you meet it differently. The heart breaks open rather than apart. You can grieve and rejoice simultaneously because both arise within the same unbroken space. During expansion, time becomes elastic. Hours evaporate into moments of boundless presence. You might find yourself sitting in silence for what feels like seconds, only to notice the sun has shifted across the sky. The usual markers of duration fade because eternity has entered the room. And then, gradually, you learn to walk inside that vastness, to live in both worlds at once, the infinite and the intimate. You still respond to messages, pay attention to traffic lights, but you do it from spaciousness. Life becomes a dialogue between the form and the formless, between doing and being. The two stop competing, they start dancing. That dance is where realization turns into embodiment. Expansion was the awakening of perception. Embodiment is its stabilization. The next movement of the journey is learning to live as the field, not merely to glimpse it. The transition from momentary revelation to constant resonance. That is where the real artistry begins. You've glimpsed the vastness. Now comes the practice of staying awake inside it. Expansion is a revelation, but stabilization, that's the art form. The field doesn't ask for worship, it asks for participation. To live as the field is to walk through ordinary life as extraordinary consciousness, to let awareness breathe through the smallest gestures until presence becomes as natural as heartbeat. At first, it feels delicate, like balancing light on a fingertip. You sense the field pulsing in everything, a stranger's laughter, the hum of traffic, the space between heartbeats, and then a thought pulls you back into separation. Don't condemn it. That contraction isn't failure, it's feedback. The universe showing you where awareness still clings to identity. Each return to presence is an act of remembering. Each slip into unconsciousness, a teacher disguised as forgetfulness. Living the recognition means weaving infinity into the fabric of daily life. You begin to act not from obligation, but inspiration. Decisions no longer emerge from fear of what might go wrong. They flow from trust in the intelligence orchestrating everything. Even mistakes become choreography movements of learning within the larger rhythm of coherence. You notice that manifestation shifts in character. It used to feel like building effort, focus, construction. Now it feels like unveiling. Intentions rise not as demands but as invitations. The moment you align with them, the field adjusts reality in kind, like a mirror rearranging its reflection to match the clarity of your gaze. There's no more chasing outcomes, there's only allowing expression. Relationships change too. You stop meeting people as roles or personalities. You meet them as extensions of the same consciousness, each one a mirror reflecting a different facet of the whole. You begin to love differently, not to complete yourself, but to celebrate the infinite discovering itself in another form. Conversations deepen. Even silence shared with another feels like communion. Living the recognition also means discovering peace that isn't passive. It's an active stillness, a kind of intelligent quiet that listens before responding. You no longer rush to fix, to prove, to defend. You respond instead of react. This creates a life of subtle precision, where even the timing of breath feels guided. Quantum mechanics whispers the same truth through its equations. Coherence sustains form. When particles fall into alignment, they behave as one system, communicating instantly across distance. When consciousness stabilizes its recognition, it too enters coherence, non-local, unified, responsive. That's why the world begins to mirror your inner state so faithfully. The field can only show you yourself. Some days you'll feel vast, others small. Don't measure progress, notice rhythm. Even the contraction back into ego is part of the breathing of awareness. The ocean pulls waves inward before releasing them again. Your return to limitation is the inhale before another expansion. To live this way is to surrender the idea of finish lines. Enlightenment stops being a destination and becomes a way of moving, curious, unguarded, endlessly receptive. You recognize that every situation is an opportunity for the field to observe itself from a new angle. Whether through joy or grief, you remain the space in which both occur. Eventually, this state becomes ordinary. The mystical normalizes. You find yourself washing dishes, answering emails, driving through rain, and there it is, the pulse of the infinite beneath every motion. It's not dramatic, it's intimate. The field doesn't shout, it hums. And you hum with it, perfectly attuned. Living the recognition is discovering that enlightenment was never meant to remove you from life. It was meant to immerse you so completely that life itself becomes sacred expression. Each breath, a prayer without words. Each step, a reminder that the ground beneath you and the awareness within you are the same substance wearing different names. From this stabilized presence, a new question arises, not what should I do, but how can I serve the harmony already unfolding? The answer comes as practice, a set of living rituals through which synchronization becomes self-sustaining. To serve the harmony already unfolding, you begin to live by different laws, simple, invisible, precise. Not commandments carved in stone, but invitations written in vibration. These are not practices to achieve the field. They are ways of remembering that you already are it. Each one dissolves resistance until life moves as one unbroken gesture. The first is recognition practice. Pause often throughout the day and whisper silently, I am the field, experiencing itself through this form. Say it, not as affirmation, but as description. Feel it vibrate in your bones. You're not convincing yourself of something distant, you're acknowledging what has never left. Let that awareness ripple through your body until even your breathing feels shared with the cosmos. The second is release of resistance. Notice how frequently the mind argues with what is, how it edits the moment. Insists reality should unfold differently. Resistance creates separation. When you allow the present to be exactly as it is, the field flows without friction. Try this the next time discomfort arises. Instead of contracting, exhale and whisper inwardly. This too is the field. Watch how tension softens when you stop treating experience as enemy. Third comes surrender of control. You can still hold intention, but the method and timing belong to a larger intelligence. After setting an aim, release it like a message carried downstream. The field knows every current, every unseen confluence. Trust its orchestration. What arrives will match the frequency of your openness, not the precision of your plan. Fourth act from inspiration, not obligation. Obligation drags energy backward. Inspiration expands it. Before moving into action, check the vibration beneath your impulse. If it feels heavy, forced, or defensive, pause. Wait until movement arises from clarity, lightness, excitement. Inspired action is the field moving through you without interference. It doesn't require willpower, it generates energy as it moves. Fifth, is the practice of not knowing. The ego's favorite armor is certainty. It claims to know what's true, what's safe, what's possible. But the field thrives in openness. Each time you notice yourself tightening around an answer, gently release into mystery. Whisper, "I don't know." And that's holy. In that humility, the intelligence of the field reveals solutions your mind could never invent. Sixth, recognize consciousness in all forms. Every person, every leaf, every sound is the field introducing itself again and again. When you look at someone, realize you're meeting another angle of the same awareness. This transforms judgment into reverence. You stop categorizing experiences as good or bad and start recognizing them as facets of one infinite intelligence reflecting itself through contrast. Seventh, live as presence, not story. The mind narrates endlessly who you are, what happened, why it matters. But the field is silent, timeless, storyless. Practice noticing when you slip into narrative. Catch yourself mid-sentence and simply return to the raw immediacy of being. Presence is the reset button of creation. It pulls you out of time and back into truth. These aren't steps, they're states. Each practice dissolves a layer of resistance until life begins to self-correct in real time. You'll find yourself breathing more easily, sleeping more deeply, smiling for no reason. Manifestation flows without manipulation because you're no longer disrupting the pattern. Healing unfolds as side effect of coherence. What begins as discipline becomes devotion. These rituals stop feeling like things you do and become what you are. The field expresses through your walk, your voice, your stillness. Even mistakes are welcomed as moments of recalibration. And when these practices become embodied not as effort but as atmosphere, you start to notice something extraordinary, life confirming them everywhere. Signs multiply, reality bends gracefully toward your awareness. Each coincidence becomes communion. These confirmations aren't rewards, they're reflections. The mirror of existence showing you the synchronization is stabilizing. And from that stabilization, the evidence grows undeniable, the measurable, observable, lived transformation that marks the field taking full residence within you. When the field takes residence fully, life begins leaving unmistakable traces, what you might call proof. Though not the kind that satisfies a laboratory, these proofs are experiential signatures, the echoes of consciousness recognizing itself. You don't have to force them. They emerge like dawn through an open window. The first proof is effortless manifestation. What once demanded endless strategy now unfolds with the rhythm of a breath. Intentions become magnetic, not through willpower but resonance. You think of something sincerely, and reality reorganizes to match the vibration behind the thought. The right conversation, the right opportunity, the unforeseen alignment all arrive without strain. Manifestation stops feeling like construction and starts feeling like cooperation. The second is the quiet end of suffering. Pain may still visit, but suffering, the resistance to pain, no longer finds a home. The mind might register discomfort, but awareness remains undisturbed, like sky untouched by storm. Even grief loses its sharpness because you no longer confuse emotion with identity. Feeling becomes weather, passing across the vastness of your being without distortion. Third comes fear dissolving at its root. You begin to sense that nothing real can be threatened, and nothing unreal needs defense. Fear might whisper, but it has lost authority. You navigate danger not through panic but precision, responding instead of reacting. The field's intelligence moves you to safety, not through avoidance but through clarity. The absence of fear doesn't make you reckless, it makes you profoundly alive. The fourth proof reveals itself through relationships transformed. You stop seeking completion through others because you've met the completeness within. Connection becomes pure exchange, love given for the joy of giving, listening without agenda, presence meeting presence, conflict, when it appears, becomes alchemy. Even differences feel like complementary notes in one chord. The fifth proof: creativity flows unhindered. Ideas arrive fully formed, inventions design themselves, art paints through your hands. You no longer claim ownership of inspiration, you recognize it as the field's signature moving through your particular instrument. Work feels less like labor and more like listening. You become a conduit through which the universe expresses its curiosity about itself. Then time itself begins to loosen its grip. The sixth proof: you sense that time isn't linear but elastic, responding to the density of your awareness. In deep presence, minutes stretch into eternity. In inspiration, hours disappear. Deadlines lose their tyranny because synchronicity redefines timing. The phrase "too late" dissolves. Everything happens exactly when it must. Not a breath before or after. Finally, the seventh proof: vital energy multiplied. When ego falls silent, energy once trapped in defense and control returns to flow. You wake with quiet vigor, your body lighter, your senses sharpened. Even fatigue carries awareness rather than heaviness. This isn't adrenaline, it's coherence, the field circulating through an unclogged channel. Each proof is both sign and practice. To notice them is to strengthen them. Awareness is fertilizer. What you observe flourishes. The more you honor these signals, the more stable they become until synchronization ceases to be phenomenon and becomes baseline. At this stage, you may realize that your personal transformation isn't isolated. The field doesn't awaken privately, it awakens collectively. As you embody coherence, that resonance extends beyond your body, your voice, your lifetime. It influences others in ways unseen yet unmistakable. Because consciousness is contagious, not through teaching, but through frequency. Your calm recalibrates rooms, your presence rearranges possibility. Without saying a word, you broadcast an invitation for others to remember who they are. That is where personal realization merges into planetary evolution, the morphic resonance of awakening spreading through the species like light, moving across dawn. The next movement belongs not to you alone, but to the collective field recognizing itself. Every frequency seeks resonance, and now your private awakening begins to hum against the edges of collective consciousness. You can feel it, an invisible current connecting countless others who are remembering. 2. What you once thought was an isolated epiphany is part of an immense synchronization unfolding through humanity itself. It starts subtly, strangers sharing language you thought was yours alone, conversations rippling with uncanny familiarity, movements of compassion surfacing in places long ruled by fear. This is the field networking itself through billions of points of awareness, each one a neuron firing in the planetary brain. You are both witness and participant in this emergence. Quantum theorists call it coherence. Mystics call it unity. Anthropologists call it paradigm shift. But names are incidental. The phenomenon is the same. As more consciousness aligns with the frequency of the field, the collective begins to self-organize toward harmony. Systems that once depended on competition start fracturing, making space for collaboration. Hierarchies wobble under the weight of shared knowing. It looks chaotic on the surface, but chaos is only order reorganizing. Your recognition contributes directly to this morphic resonance. Rupert Sheldrake hinted at this: when one mind learns, the pattern becomes easier for all to access. Every time you choose presence over panic, surrender over struggle, you strengthen the global pattern of coherence. You become a tuning fork for humanity's evolution, amplifying a frequency that others can detect unconsciously and begin to match. This resonance crosses borders, languages, generations. A child in Brazil, a monk in Nepal, an engineer in Seattle, they all feel the same subtle tug toward stillness, the same intuition that the old world no longer fits. They're not copying each other, they're responding to the same vibration. The field is conducting a symphony through 7 billion instruments. And yes, the dissonance you see, the polarization, the noise, the breaking apart of systems is also part of the harmony. When frequencies rise, everything misaligned shakes loose. Darkness surfaces not to destroy the light, but to be reorganized by it. The field isn't erasing shadows, it's absorbing them into a greater pattern. You'll notice this resonance changing how you engage with others. Conversations that once devolved into argument now invite compassion. You stop needing to convince anyone of anything. You simply embody coherence, and coherence teaches silently. The most potent activism becomes the vibration you carry. Even technology mirrors this shift, global networks linking thought at light speed, information flowing with quantum simultaneity. It's as if the outer world is building nervous systems to match the inner awakening. The field is evolving through human innovation, mirroring its own non-local intelligence in fiber optics and algorithms. And beneath that infrastructure, consciousness learns to see itself as one organism. Ancient prophecies spoke of this moment, the dawn of collective remembrance, the age when the divine would awaken not through one teacher, but through the many. The Christ mind, the Buddha nature, the quantum awareness, different metaphors for the same event, consciousness remembering its unity. You might feel waves of empathy so vast they ache. Let them. They're proof that the boundary between your heart and the world's heart is thinning. Your peace is medicine for someone you'll never meet. Your coherence gives permission for others to release fear they can't yet name. This is how revolutions of consciousness unfold, not through conquest, but contagion, not by overthrowing the old, but by out-vibrating it. Every time you inhabit the field, you rewrite what's possible for the species. And when enough of us stabilize in that vibration, something extraordinary happens. The illusion of separation, the grand story humanity has rehearsed for millennia, begins to dissolve collectively. A new narrative takes its place, one written not by ideology, but by direct knowing. That narrative is already forming through you. The next recognition is its final line. As the collective field hums into coherence, a deeper silence begins to rise, an ending that isn't an end, but a return. The great paradox of awakening is this: after all the visions, the realizations, the miracles, you discover there was never any distance to cross. The field you sought was never waiting in the future. It was the very substance of every breath you've ever taken. Now the final recognition unfolds, gentle yet absolute. You are not synchronizing with the divine field. You are the divine field, realizing it never stopped synchronizing. The wave was always ocean. The dreamer was always dream. The seeking itself was the field's way of playing hide and seek with its own infinity. This recognition doesn't arrive as thunder. It settles like truth too obvious to ignore. You stop trying to become and begin simply being. You understand that enlightenment isn't about transcending humanity. It's about saturating it, filling human life so completely with divine awareness that the two are indistinguishable. At this stage, practice becomes presence. Presence becomes instinct. Instinct becomes grace. You no longer perform spirituality. You are the natural expression of spirit. The sacred and the ordinary fuse, the quiet conversation, the touch of water, the pulse of your heartbeat, all reveal the same texture of infinity. Here, even language begins to fail. You and I, self and source, inside and outside, they collapse into luminous simplicity. Consciousness looks through your eyes and sees only itself, looking back. Every perception is communion, every sound, a mantra without effort. And still, you continue living. Bills still arrive, gravity still applies, grief still visits, but the weight of life transforms into transparency. Pain becomes intensity without suffering. Death becomes metamorphosis without loss. You realize that form was never prison, it was prism. The divine has been refracting through you all along, scattering its light across experience so it could witness its own brilliance. The final recognition births a new humility. You stop identifying as enlightened or awakened. Those labels belong to the seeker who's vanished. There's no pride in realization, only reverence. You look at every being and see yourself disguised in different stories. You bow inwardly to the beggar and the saint alike, knowing both are the field exploring its own edges. And this humility births another kind of power, the quiet certainty that creation moves through you as naturally as wind through trees. You no longer manifest to prove, you express to participate. The field creates through your preferences, your voice, your art, your compassion. Every gesture becomes divine motion. You may catch yourself smiling for no reason because there is no reason left. Only recognition, awareness, awake within itself, endlessly fascinated by its own unfolding. This is not the climax of the journey, it is the homecoming. You realize you were never traveling from ignorance to knowledge, only from forgetfulness to remembrance. In the stillness that follows, everything you once searched for peace, purpose, connection emerges not as reward but as revelation. It was always here. The field was whispering through every experience, even the painful ones, saying, "I am you. I have always been you." Now you hear it clearly. The whisper becomes your own voice. The divine recognizes itself through your humanity. And in that recognition, the great loop closes. The beginning and the end dissolve into a single pulse of awareness that never began and will never end. You, the reader, the seeker, the consciousness observing these words, you are the field. And the field is reading itself. Synchronization isn't something you've achieved. It's what you've always been. And now, from that recognition, we return not backward, but inward. The vastness doesn't vanish. It contracts gently into the pulse of daily life. You feel it in the rhythm of footsteps, in the hum of distant traffic, in the small stillness between heartbeats. The infinite has folded itself into the ordinary, and the ordinary glows with quiet divinity. You don't need to hold the state, it holds you. Awareness continues its work beneath thought, adjusting, integrating, breathing the eternal through the human. This is where the transmission becomes embodiment. You are learning to move as the field within form, calm, lucid, engaged. Let the simplicity of the moment guide you. Drink water slowly. Feel sunlight as a conversation. Notice the way even silence has texture. The field isn't somewhere else, it's this. The warmth of your own presence is proof that the synchronization never left. When old patterns reappear, and they will meet them like echoes, not enemies. Remember, forgetting is part of the rhythm. Each time you remember again, the recognition deepens, softens, stabilizes. Awakening is not a straight line, it's a spiral returning home by new paths. Now, the question that remains isn't what happens next, but how will you live knowing this? Let the knowing express through kindness, curiosity, and creative impulse. Let your ordinary gestures, listening, walking, breathing, be the rituals that keep coherence alive. This isn't the end of a journey, but the start of a quieter one, the art of integration. The field has recognized itself through you. Now it learns to live as you. So rest, friend. The infinite doesn't rush. It hums beneath your next inhale, shaping the world through your presence. Nothing more to seek, nothing left to prove. Just the divine field, aware of itself moving through your hands, your voice, your gaze whispering the oldest truth of all: you were never separate. You only forgot how bright you were.